Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Wreck and Rule. My name is Brian. The game came out this past weekend, which is awesome. Hopefully you guys got some product, you got your boxes, you opened up your packs, you saw some cool stuff, you got some games in. If you're lucky, you had a game store nearby that was running events. You got to go there, hang out with people, try some teams out, try some decks out. If you didn't, I highly recommend that you guys go to your local game store, you talk to the owner there. They may not be stocking the product. They might not even know about the product. So I recommend that you inform them about it. Try to get a demo night going. Try to maybe meet consistently week by week. I'll probably do another episode about this. There have been a lot of people posting about how, they don't have something going on at their store. At the same time, it can sometimes be risky, especially for smaller game stores, to take a chance on a product that is brand new, that doesn't have that built-in constant support like Magic does, and a few other major game systems out there, Yu-Gi-Oh, that just help the game store to keep the lights on, keep the doors open, and keep the store running. I'll do an episode about that in the future. I've done something similar where in my local area, I've built up the community for games like X-Wing, games like Star Wars Destiny, to where we have a healthy community for both now. We'll talk about that in the future. But anyway, for me personally, I'm super pumped up. I managed to pull the Dinobot team that I've been looking to build, and it seems like everybody else is also looking to build. I got super nervous that early on in my first box, my first two rares were Sunstorm and Cosmos, and to be honest, they were the two that I was least interested in seeing. So I was then super pumped up that I also managed to get my boy Grimlock. I also got lucky in my second box. I managed to get the super rare version of Bumblebee. Joe, in his very first box, managed to get Nemesis Prime. So you will see both of them on camera in the near future. Now, as nerds, we are super hyped up. We are super, we're anticipating the product in the moments up until when we actually get it. And then when we get it, we open it. We're happy to have it. We're happy to test it out. We're happy to play with it. But then, of course, we are looking towards the future. So already you guys have seen a ton of questions flying at Drew, flying at John in the Facebook group, asking when we're going to see teasers for Wave 2. We know that we have Metroplex coming up pretty soon, so that will help to kind of scratch that itch, but obviously we want to know what is coming up for Wave 2. Today I wanted to hit you guys up with my thoughts on possibilities that we might see in Wave 2 for some of the characters. If you've not listened to it yet, I highly recommend that you check out the podcast from TFW 2005, where they interview Drew, who is the brand manager for the Transformers TCG. And he kind of goes over a lot of really cool information. One of the things that he mentions is that they're designing and they're developing product that will be coming out for the game at this time of next year. So it does seem that they've got at least a year of product planned out for us, which is fantastic. Looking forward to it. He also mentioned some ideas that, a lot of the different Transformers lines that we've had over the years have some sort of gimmick, whether it's, we go back to G1, we had things like the Headmasters, or we had the Combiners or Triple Changers, and then we had with Armada, we had the Minicons, and then a whole bunch of other ideas. And he mentions that, the team that he works with, they've done little design challenges where they see how they could incorporate these things into the card game, which is really cool. Obviously, he mentions that they're not going to incorporate all of them, but, they do little challenges to see how they can make it work with the game system, which is fantastic. While I'm talking about outside resources, first of all, I will link to you guys in the description down below. I'll link to you guys to that TFW podcast so you guys can take a listen to it. I also have to give a shout out to one of our local guys. His name is Scott. He has a website that he started called Vector Sigma, where he's going to do some articles and do some analysis. He did an analysis about the Dinobots that is fantastic and goes into a lot of the math, a lot of the statistics behind what you want to see in that deck and how to make it work. and it's fantastic. It's a lot more in depth than I can give you. I teach English as my job. The numbers I struggle with, so I'll link that also in the description. I highly recommend that you check it out. So without further ado, let's start talking about Wave 2. So to begin with, I think that we're going to see some new keywords in here. Just some of the characters that we're going to see in the future to fit them into the archetypes that the game wants to give to us. I think that we're going to see helicopter as one of our next keywords. A lot of fan favorite characters that have helicopter as an alt mode, or at least one of their alt modes. I think we'll also see beast, just a generic beast, as a possible keyword as well. This would fit a lot of the, Predacons would fit under this category. You would see the Terrorcons would fit under this category. The monster bots like Grotesque, Repugnus, and Double Cross would fit in this category. And I think also equipment might be another one. So I'm thinking here of characters like Soundwave, like Perceptor, where there's not currently a good keyword that would fit with their alt mode. On top of that, I also feel that we're going to get some of the keywords from Wave 1 will be expanded. Now, obviously, we are without a doubt going to see more cars. We're going to see more planes. However, these two keywords, spaceships and motorcycles, are kind of, although we have multiple characters for each, spaceship, we have Shockwave, we have Cosmos, motorcycle, we have RC, we have Chromia, we have Flame War. We don't have any battle cards that trigger off of those keywords. So I think that we are likely to both A, get more characters that fall into these categories, and then B, we're likely to get some battle cards where these keywords have some type of effect, which is going to be fantastic. We'll talk a little bit more about those ideas a little bit later. So I think it's almost a certainty that in Wave 2, we're going to see, I think Hasbro calls these their evergreen characters. So no matter whenever they reboot a toy line or whenever they create a new show, you will almost always see these characters pop up. So we will probably see at least one more version of Optimus Prime. We will probably see at least one more version of Megatron. We will probably see at least one more version of Bumblebee, especially with the new movie coming out and that being a big push. We will probably see another version of Starscream. I think another area that they can start to fill things out is going to be to fill out when you think of G1, the main characters. So these are the characters that you saw in Seasons 1 and Season 2 of the cartoon. These are the characters that came out in the 84, the 85 toy lines. I'm going to begin with a personal favorite of mine is Brawn. So Brawn, kind of like just a gung-ho, headstrong type of character in the cartoon, transforms into essentially what would be a truck. So I think he'd be fantastic to see out there. I think that Sideswipe is someone that we're likely to see. You see him pop up a lot whenever they reboot a G1 inspired toy line. And if we have Sideswipe, it would be neat to also have Sunstreaker, who is considered to be his twin or his brother in the different continuities. It'd be cool if they somehow had abilities that triggered off of each other. Maybe Sideswipe has something where if Sunstreaker is on the table, he gets some type of benefit. And maybe Sunstreaker has something similar, or maybe he has something that triggers off of if you started the game with Sideswipe, but then he dies. Maybe Sunstreaker gets boosted up. Maybe he gets ticked off. He wants revenge, so he powers up. Would be a neat effect to see out there. Another character would be Trailbreaker. Trailbreaker, also from the G1 cartoon, didn't really have a ton of attention on him in the different episodes, but he does appear there. His kind of gimmick is that he can create force fields. In fact, you see him as the character on the art for the force field battle card. It'd be neat to have him out there. Maybe something like Shrapnel's robot effect, where he can only take a certain amount of damage each turn. Might be kind of neat. Or maybe he can somehow grant that to another character on his team. Blue Streak is another character that we are probably likely to see. He is very similar, like body-wise, the same chassis as Prowl has, but he's another one of those G1 show Autobots that we have not seen yet. Ratchet is kind of a conspicuous absence from Wave 1. I think it's likely that we end up seeing him in Wave 2, probably with some type of repair effect that he can give to the other members of his team. Would make sense. Also another truck, and I think that would be good because right now trucks are a little bit limited if you want to build an all-truck team. He also would help to keep your high-cost trucks alive. I'm thinking of, the common or the rare version of Prime, and of course Inferno as well. Maybe Nemesis too. Warpath makes sense to me as another possible Autobot that we can see. We currently do not have any Autobot tanks, and he is kind of the archetypical Autobot tank that we tend to see. Think about the Transformers War for Cybertron games, Fall of Cybertron, like you see him pop up as a playable character. I could see him popping up in the game as well. On that note, we'll probably also end up seeing Power Glide at some point. He's an Autobot jet. Right now we only have Jetfire. I could see Power Glide popping in there as kind of a low-cost filler type of character for Autobot jets. Perceptor also makes sense. Big character in Season 2, Season 3 of the cartoon. Pops up a lot in the current IDW comic book series. I'd be surprised if we do not see Perceptor at some point. And this could even be a spot for another keyword. We might see the Scientist keyword, which would be kind of neat. Elita 1 also makes sense as a character that we should see. She is the leader of the female Autobots on Cybertron in Season 2. She's popped up in a lot of different comic books throughout the year, so I think she'd be a fantastic character too. One of the incarnations of her has her transform into a motorcycle. That could also be a potential character that we see pop up with that keyword. Looking now at the Decepticons to kind of fill out that 84, 85 list. The one that everybody has been asking about that they want to see is Soundwave. It makes a lot of sense that we'll see him. I've sort of been speculating for a long time that we might see him as the basis of a Decepticon starter box, which would make sense for Wave 2 to maybe also have out there. So of course, if you have Soundwave, you have to have his cassettes. So I think the most likely ones that we'll see would be Rumble. Now, if you've watched the cartoon, you're used to Rumble being a blue character. There was kind of a discrepancy somewhere where the cartoons flipped their identities. The toys, Frenzy is the blue one. So in this case, we'll have to see what they go with. Ravage makes sense. And we'll probably also see Laserbeak. Now, I think it's going to be interesting how they choose to implement this because these characters are very tightly linked together with Soundwave. So you could either have them be separate characters or you maybe introduce some type of mechanic where you have them as battle cards. So maybe if they pop up into your hand, you can put them on the table as sort of like a powered down mini version of a character. I don't know exactly what you do with their alt modes because they all only transform into a cassette tape, and I'm not sure exactly what abilities they would have in that mode. Maybe they could hide, so maybe in cassette mode they can temporarily not be attacked or something like that. Maybe make them low health, this way they're not too overpowered. So I'm not quite sure what they'll do, but it's a pretty strong possibility that we see Soundwave coming up in Wave 2. And I'd like to think that he could be a focal point for a Decepticon starter. Another character from the Season 1 of the original cartoon would be Reflector. So Reflector, there are 3 robots that turn into one alt mode, which is the camera mode, and they kind of combine together into that camera. So I could see them somehow working that into the game as well. Now, whether you have 3 separate characters out there and they somehow combine into the camera, or if you've got the camera on one side of the card and then you flip it over and they are essentially kind of like a team of 3 characters on one card together, I think either way you can make that work. There's some interesting possibilities there. If we move forward to the Season 2 characters, so this here is Dirge. Dirge is one of the 3 Conehead jets, along with Ramjet. We saw Ramjet in Wave 1. I think they'll eventually fill out the rest of the jets. I think that we could use a couple more like 5, 6, 7 cost jets just to make team building a little bit easier. I could see Dirge fitting with that. He doesn't really have any crazy gimmick or like personality trait associated with him. He would kind of fit as just kind of a generic jet that you can throw in there for a relatively cheap cost. On that same note, we are likely to get Thrust as well. So Thrust, same idea. There's not really anything that makes him stand out. Ramjet does stand out. He likes to crash into things, so you've got that very high attack in his jet mode, and he's also a melee jet, which is kind of neat. So yeah, I think that we will end up seeing Thrust as well at some point. To continue on, I think another area that they can kind of fill things out would be to expand on the Dinobot and the Insecticon keywords. So although we don't often think of Skylynx as being a Dinobot, officially I believe that his alt mode, they call him a Dino Bird. So I think that could be a way that you add another Dinobot to the team. The original 5, they're very, very iconic. So I would be surprised if they start adding in some of the Dinobots from, you know, lesser known EU stories. There's Paddles, who is from, they did like a novel where they do a bunch of short stories. Paddles was a new Dinobot they introduced who turns into a Plesiosaurus, which is basically, I think, the Loch Ness Monster, aquatic dinosaur-like creature. They could also do, I think Slash is the name of it. He's the Velociraptor that they put out in one of the newer toy lines. Skylynx is a little bit more of an iconic character. I could see him being in there. So that is a possibility. He could have the Dinobot keyword. While we're here, I don't have a picture for this, but I do think that they could eventually rework Slag. Right now, he's kind of high cost for what he does. He has no special abilities. His stats are pretty high, but it would be neat to see a Slag that has some special abilities baked into him too. They could also fill out the Insecticon. So the one conspicuous absence right now is Venom. Venom is the last of they call them the deluxe Insecticons. They never showed up in the cartoons. They've showed up in different comics or other media throughout the years. Venom is the only one out of the original Generation 1 Insecticons that we do not have. So I could see him also being in there somehow. This is a little bit of a dark horse candidate, but we've had people saying that they want to see Beast Wars characters in the games. I think we could see Black Arachnia potentially also get the Insecticon keyword. Obviously, she's never been an official member of the team, but I could definitely see it. You know, that would be a good spot to put her in there and start to introduce Beast Wars characters. We got Demolisher in Wave 1. He's originally from Transformers Armada. So maybe they want to throw in like a character here or there that are from like the non-traditional Generation 1 continuity, but who we've still seen from like the Generations subline of like toys or art style or character style or what have you. One more dark horse candidate here would be Arachnid. So she was from the Transformers Prime cartoon. So she's actually a triple changer. She goes from robot to spider to helicopter. So she might be neat to see in there. Again, you've got that either Insecticon or Beast keyword. And then you could also have the helicopter keyword. And while we're talking about triple changers, Drew does mention that that is a gimmick that they know that people want to see. So if we do see them, I think it's highly likely that we end up getting Blitzwing. So Blitzwing would have in his different modes both the tank keyword and also the plane keyword. And I think there's some interesting possibilities for what you could do there. Going with that, Astro Train is also a logical potential character to see. So in this case, you would have Spaceship as one alt mode, and then his other alt mode is a train, which could maybe open up another potential keyword possibility. But when you get right down to it, there are not a ton of other train transformers unless you get into things like the Robots in Disguise had Rail Racer, where there were 3 robots that turned into trains that could also combine into a larger combiner. But Astro Train is kind of one of those iconic Decepticon triple changers. For the Autobot side, they could go with Sandstorm. So Sandstorm, he goes from helicopter to like dune buggy car mode into robot mode. So I think he's a possibility. Again, he would bring in that helicopter side, which I think that we are likely to see. And then obviously we've had a lot of people saying that they would like to see Springer. Springer would go from car or possibly truck. His alt mode could maybe go either way into helicopter. He also helps to fill out kind of those movie characters as well. So while we're talking about movie characters, at some point we have to see Hot Rod. Hot Rod, a lot of people love him, so it's likely that we will see him in the game. I think that we'll probably see him as Hot Rod first, and then maybe eventually down the road see him as Rodimus. Or maybe, getting a little bit crazy here, maybe there could be some mechanic where throughout the game, the course of the game, he could power up from Hot Rod into Rodimus. We already have the Matrix as a battle card, so maybe we could have, if you manage to put the Matrix on him, maybe Rodimus has some type of special ability that could trigger off of that, which would be cool. I could also see us getting Ultra Magnus. He's been a major character. He's gotten a lot of toys recently. It makes sense that we see him. He's got that truck keyword as well. I would not be surprised if we see him in the game as well. Blur would make sense. You could have some, his special abilities could trigger off the fact that he is super fast. So likely that we see him at some point too. We have to go with Wreck-Ar. Wreck-Ar gives us that motorcycle keyword, and maybe he could come back. Like maybe after you defeat him, there could be some way to bring him back. That also could be on the card. Or maybe he repairs himself every turn, something similar. If we have Wreck-Ar, we also have the possibility of having some generic characters. We could just have Junkions as well. So maybe you could field, multiple Junkions as well as field Wreck-Ar. You would also get more motorcycles if you have them on your team. Going for the Decepticon side of the movie characters, Galvatron is a likely candidate to see. He also, for that alt mode, he turns into that like treaded gun, so it could either be a tank or it could maybe be that equipment keyword that we might see. But he would definitely make sense as a character that we see, probably somebody with a very high star cost. Cyclonus would also make sense to see out there. Cyclonus, we could also see him fill out the spaceship keyword, which would be kind of neat to have. Scourge, and then the sweeps would also make sense to have out there. They could also fill out that spaceship keyword. Drew spends a lot of time talking about combiners, and it's going to be interesting to see how they eventually implement it into the game. I think that we could see them in Wave 2, possibly. In which case, like the iconic combiners, it's tough. You look at G1, you look at the cartoon. I think that we are likely to get the Combaticons as one of our first combiner teams. The reason why is they have a pretty diverse set of alt modes. So with Swindle and with Onslaught, you could have trucks as their alt mode. Brawl turns into a tank as his alt mode. Blast Off is a spaceship, and then Vortex is a helicopter. I think that we're likely to see that just because they've got different alt modes. That's a possibility. And on top of that, I think Onslaught, you could either have him be a truck or a tank because his alt mode is kind of a mix between the two. On top of that, like if you go back to Fall of Cybertron, the video game, and then the toy line that went with that too, the Combaticons were the ones that they were pushing as like that combiner character that showed up in the game. So if you have them, I think it makes sense to also have the Protectobots. Again, because you have a variety of different alt modes. So you would have with Hotspot, you'd have truck. With First Aid, you could also probably have truck. With Blades, you have helicopter. With Groove, you have motorcycle. With Streetwise, you have car. This is Rook. I don't think we'll see him. They kind of added him in the toy line. I don't think we'll see him out there, but, they could do whatever they want. And it makes sense. Like these two teams, the Combaticons and the Protectobots, they are directly opposed to each other. I think it's a little bit less likely that we see the Stunticons and see the Aerial Bots, simply because they all essentially share the same alt mode. Motormaster is a truck, but everybody else is a car. And then with Superion, everybody would be a plane. And I mean, the Autobots could use some more plane characters. It wouldn't hurt. But, that's a lot of keywords. A lot of characters come into that keyword all at once. They're all kind of like very much the same. So I'd be surprised if they went that route, but it is possible. I'd be surprised if they gave us things like the Predacons or like the Terrorcons, the Technobots as the first combiners we see. They're not quite as iconic. I know people love the Predacons. But they could be someone that kind of fills out that beast keyword if that is something that we eventually see. The Constructicons are sort of that iconic G1 combiner. So the weird thing is that if you do the Constructicons traditionally, they do have 6 different characters. And I think it's going to be harder to squeeze that into a 25-point team. They could find a way to do it. They could maybe combine 2 characters into one. Scavenger and Bone Crusher are kind of like the 2 Constructicons that are a little bit less iconic. Nothing really differentiates them personality-wise. Scrapper, is the leader. Hook is kind of the leader. He's also kind of snooty. Long Haul, everybody is overlooking him because all he does is carry stuff around. Mixmaster does crazy stuff with chemicals. These 2 guys don't have a whole lot going for him personality-wise. I think Bone Crusher is just angry, if I'm remembering correctly. And then Scavenger has he has an inadequacy complex or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Constructicons, Devastator is that iconic, he is that iconic G1 combiner, but I think it's a little bit trickier to implement him into the game. I do think we'll see him eventually, but I'd be surprised if we see him first. I want to take a look now at kind of Dark Horse type characters. So ones that kind of come out of left field. If you look at Wave 1, we got some surprising characters like Straxus. In the game, they call him Darkmount. So he was from the G1 comics. You saw him a little bit in the US comics. You saw more of him in the UK comics because they were able to get issues out more frequently than in the US. So they had to kind of supplement them with additional storylines. Simon Furman, who went on to write the second half of the G1 comics, he got started by writing for the UK comics. Darkmount kind of came out of left field. Deadlock came out of left field. He was the Decepticon version of Drift before he becomes the Autobot version of Drift. So there are some very surprising characters there. So I think it's possible that we also get some, out of left field characters in Wave 2. I think one candidate for this would be Windblade. So Windblade was a character who Hasbro kind of ran a contest essentially where fans were able to vote on different stages for a new character. And eventually from that, we ended up getting Windblade. So she's a female Autobot. She would work well as a leader keyword type of character. She's also a jet, so we would get another Autobot jet as well. So I think Windblade is someone that we are likely to see at some point show up in the game. The art's a little bit dark here, but this is Brainstorm. So Brainstorm is one of the Autobot headmasters. He has a lot of stuff going on for him in the IDW comics. He's a fairly big character in More Than Meets the Eye, which then turns into Lost Light. He'd be somebody where he could work as a spaceship keyword, and if they maybe bring in scientist as a keyword as well, would also work well for that. On top of that, if they want to really kind of dig deeper, they could have him be a headmaster and somehow have that factor into the game. Going with the Autobots that we might see, Drift makes a lot of sense. We saw Deadlock, his kind of before he becomes an Autobot, he's named Deadlock. He's a Decepticon. I could see him showing up in the game as an Autobot. So as the Drift that people either love or hate to love or love to hate, depending on whether you look at him being written by Shane McCarthy or being written by James Roberts in More Than Meets the Eye and Lost Light. I think another kind of oddball character we could see would be Swerve. Swerve is somebody who kind of didn't do a whole lot in the G1 cartoon. If I'm remembering correctly, I think like Trypticon at some point kicks him, and that might be the biggest thing that he does. He had like a little mini bot. He was a remold of Brawn, essentially, in the G1 toy line. But he's been a really big character in More Than Meets the Eye, in Lost Light. He is a fan favorite, kind of a jokester character, but also kind of a tragic character too. I think it's likely that he could pop up in the game. He is a fan favorite. And one more Autobot out of left field character would maybe be Skids. Skids is also from the More Than Meets the Eye comic books. He showed up in, I think, one episode of the G1 cartoon. I think it was Triple Takeover, where Blitzwing temporarily takes over from Megatron as leader of the Decepticons. I think you only see him in his van mode, and even then, like, he's just driving down the street and gets trapped or something like that. He transforms into a van. I could see that being a truck keyword character. He'd be kind of neat to have out there. His thing in the comics is that he's able to kind of pick up new skills quickly, so maybe he could mirror the rules text of another character on the table. Might be kind of neat. Going now for kind of out of left field Decepticon characters. Bludgeon is one that has popped up quite a bit. He was a pretender, so like you open up the outer shell and there's a robot inside. He had like a cool samurai skeleton type of look to him, and he's popped up throughout the years. He's kind of like a martial artist. He's got a katana. They eventually had him stop being a pretender and just kind of turn into a tank. He's been a pretty major factor in the IDW comics. A lot of people like him. He'd be another tank character. I could very definitely see Bludgeon pop up. Similar to that, we also have Dreadwing. Would also make sense. So he's been in the comics throughout the years. He's also a pretender, but they kind of stopped. That's been on and off something that he's been capable of doing. He would also work as a spaceship character, so I think that would be kind of neat to see out there. Six Shot would be a huge challenge. So he's not a triple changer, but he is a six changer. So he's got 6 different modes that he turns into. I think that would be kind of neat to see. It would be a huge challenge for them to do. He's a fan favorite character. In the IDW comics, he's what they call a phase sixer, which means that he is incredibly powerful. They send him out there to basically like wipe out an entire planet as a one-man army. So he would be neat to see. Going with that, another phase sixer from the comics is Overlord, who's been a major character in the Wreckers comic books, in the More Than Meets the Eye, Lost Light comic books. Overlord would make sense to see out there. Could be a hugely powerful character. Depending on how they portray him, he could also maybe be a triple changer. The toy, when he went into alt mode, kind of split into a tank and into a plane. They've called that a duocon. I could maybe somehow see that being a factor. Or they could just have him turn into a tank. Could also be something that they do. We could also maybe see Tarn. So Tarn in the comics is known, he's the leader of what's called the DJD, the Decepticon Justice Division. And what he does is he and his team, they track down Decepticon deserters, and they essentially torture them to death. And he's like a big, bad, scary dude. He'd be very neat to see in the game. He's also kind of a fan favorite in the fact that people love to hate him. He's a very hateable character in what he does to the other characters in the comics. He turns into a tank. We could see that tank keyword expanded upon. It'd be neat to see. Maybe he could even get some type of bonus if he is attacking other Decepticons. Would be a neat way to implement him there. And then finally, we're getting Metroplex as some type of like special box character. We don't quite know exactly how he's going to work yet. We don't know if he's going to necessarily be someone that you see during normal play, if he's some type of like raid box character. But if we are getting Metroplex, it would make sense that at some point we also will see Trypticon as his counterpart. He could also maybe flesh out that Dinobot keywords for battle cards. Would be kind of neat to see out there. Like, he's not a member of the team, but he does turn into a dinosaur. I think it's very likely that we'll see Wave 2, and then the same way that we're seeing Metroplex as a supplemental product, it would make sense that we will see Trypticon also as a supplemental product. Thank you guys for watching and listening. We've seen our number of subscribers kind of explode over the past couple of days. We would like to see that growth going. We're really pushing to get to that 100 subscriber mark. We're, as of the recording of this, only about 10 people away from hitting that. So if you like this, please hit that like button. Please subscribe. Joe and I will continue to produce content. You guys will see some more gameplay videos. You're going to see some more analysis videos, maybe some more speculation videos. I'm hoping to get Joe to do a Nemesis Prime kind of like deck tech type of video. Joe has played a lot of Nemesis. He's got some good ideas for how to kind of fill out that battle deck there. And again, guys, I appreciate you guys listening. We're doing this because we like it. So I'm glad to see that you guys are also tuning in. Have a good rest of your day. Enjoy some games. Please leave comments if you guys have questions, if there's stuff that you want to see. If you're not in the Facebook group, join the Facebook group. A lot of people talking there about the game itself. We have WotC staff members there answering questions and interacting with us too, which is awesome.